Thank you everyone for your attention. I'm going to be introducing our first speaker this morning. Michael Horn, for the past 7 years, has been the director of the New Hampshire State Veterans Cemetery, which is in Boscawen, New Hampshire. As an employee of the State of New Hampshire's Adjutant General's Department, he is responsible for the operations and supervision of the cemetery, which encompasses 104 acres. He retired from the military in 2008 after serving proudly for 32 years, 4 years in the Air Force, and 28 years in the New Hampshire Air National Guard. He's a father and a grandfather, and he lives in Hooksett, and he's going to be talking to you about the cemetery. Michael.
Well, thank you, and good morning. First of all, how many people have been to the cemetery? Okay, so a lot of you folks already know, one, there is a veteran cemetery here in New Hampshire, and where it is, just up the street, I don't know, 10 miles or less. And so my presentation will be, could be a little boring. For those that haven't come to the cemetery, might want an application, I brought some with me. And also, I've got Sue Bellevue, who's the number 2 person at the cemetery for me. She runs the office. She's here in the audience, so she'll be critiquing and going back and telling me what I missed or what I need to change afterwards. So she's here with her mom, so thanks for being here, Sue. So again, if you're driving up Route 3 heading towards Franklin, that's the sign that you see on the side of Route 3 on the right-hand side. And cemetery opened 20 years ago in a couple of years. It's hard to believe. But I saw the presentation, so I figured, well, let's throw it up here. Who are veterans? We know the top one, members who served on active duty for the 5 branches. Also, because we're talking about women here, I thought I'd list out, Army Nurse Corps, women in the Army Corps, the women in the Air Service. There are a number of women veterans from, especially back in World War II, that kind of broke the paradigm and jumped in because the country needed them to step up. And so, thank goodness for that. The next bullet, Merchant Marines. There are some Merchant Marines who are eligible based on the mission, what boat they were on and what mission they sailed, primarily back from World War II. And also, unknown for veteran benefits and burial benefits of the cemetery, there are a few non-uniform people, Public Health Service, and then commissioned officers from the Geodetic Survey and NOAA. On the bottom, I list that only because of Merrill Dustin, who alerted me a few years ago that back in World War II, when there was a critical shortage of nurses, the country started the Cadet Nurse Corps and promised those women, typically, that they would be treated as veterans if they came to serve their country. Well, unfortunately, the promise never came true. The Cadet Nurse Corps that had, tens of thousands of women that did that, the numbers have dwindled, but they continue to try to petition the federal government to get the benefits that they were promised. So on behalf of Merrill, I throw that up there because there are some people that stepped up to serve and unfortunately aren't considered veterans. The other ones, when you see who are veterans is one thing. It's usually the benefit that somebody who served is entitled to. A lot of uniformed people that served in the National Guard or the reserves for training only, unfortunately they aren't eligible for a lot of the benefits, of which one's a burial benefit at the cemetery. So I just hit that. Any questions, you can hit me afterwards. But also saw how do we honor New Hampshire veterans and how do we do it at the cemetery? Well, one, we've got a cemetery that was designed, they tried to put it in populated areas, so a cemetery would be within 70 miles of where the veteran lives. Well, we know only one in New Hampshire is not going to serve that purpose, but it's in a pretty good area. If you go down to the borders of Mass, over to the seacoast, over to Keene, the Boscawen is somewhat geographically centered. We've got, when they built the cemetery and did the upgrades, they added things, 20 points in New Hampshire military history that talks about history from the 1600s up to the present day. We've got a memorial walkway, about 1,000-foot brick walkway that's out in the woods that has various monuments and benches. We have ceremonies throughout the year, and I listed them there, of which next Wednesday, the 11th, at 11 o'clock, we'll be having a Veterans Day ceremony. So hopefully, if you're not going to be someplace else, come on up there, try to get there by 10:30, but come join us. Down at the bottom, we do host schools. What's nice is fifth grade schools, some of the high school civics classes come up to learn about veterans and see the cemetery. You know, they may look up a loved one, but they also hit the walkways and the points of history. And the other thing is the 100 Nights of Remembrance. For those people that don't know about it, Sunday afternoon at 1 o'clock throughout the winter months, there's a volunteer that's sounding taps. And in the summertime, from Memorial Day until September 11th, every night at 7 p.m., there's a volunteer that's up there to sound taps. So this is, most of you people, again, know, here's an aerial shot taken, it's up on Route 3. That's about a year ago. You can see the developed part of the cemetery, but there's a lot more that you don't see that's up there as a cemetery. So that light colored where it says now, and that aerial picture, that's where the grass is being mowed, where the graves currently are, but where it shows future, that's the rest of the 104-acre parcel that can be developed into the eventual cemetery. I don't see the cemetery getting filled up until the very end of the century, or maybe even to the next one. The cremation rate is up over 80% now, so a lot more veterans and their spouses fit in a smaller area. Cemetery was established back in '97. The first burial took place there, so I hope to be working there in 2 more years when we hit the 20th anniversary of the opening to have something special. The bottom line shows that I've got an approved grant. The VA National Cemetery Administration funds the grants that do the construction. So looking to put in 3,000 more columbarium niches, because I'll be out of those in probably about a year and a half. You know, I should have jumped on it 2 years ago, but at least I'm on it now. Eligibility, again, veterans active duty for service for other than training. The spouse is entitled based on the eligibility of the veteran, and if there's a dependent child, that dependent child, if they pass before they reach adulthood, or if they're dependent physically or mentally, they're eligible too. And I just had some pictures. Let me go back. I'm looking forward to that. That's a spring shot. So I like winter here in New England, but I do like the long daylight, and I can't wait to see the magnolia trees blossom out in the spring. This was taken, the avenue of flags that go down. Again, flags there thanks to gracious donors that funded that effort back a few years after it opened. That's as you go in the cemetery. We do have a chapel, which was fortunate it got built when it did, because now, as the cemetery expands, we'll only be able to have what they call interment shelters, which is it's a roofed area with walls, but it's open to the environment and very cold, because we do bury year-round. But fortunately, we've got that chapel, and so those people that come for a service in the wintertime, we can give them some comfortable time when they're there for the service. An upgrade after the cemetery was to put in the stained glass there, and if you look through the window, you can't quite see it, but the brick patio on the outside where the military do honors if it's a chapel service. Next Wednesday, that's a picture of Memorial Day, but probably 300 to 400 to 500 people come up for our ceremonies. The challenge is, where are we going to park everybody as we fill more areas with graves, but we continue to work that, and so hopefully if you can come up to participate with one of the ceremonies, please do. We get some reenactments. I think this was one of the reenactment of a division that started in Massachusetts and headed up to wherever, but they made a lot of the groups stop at the cemeteries as they're going, whether it's a motorcycle group or the reenactment group. Kind of spooky when, almost like the ghosts walking the cemetery. The flags on the graves, we do it twice a year, Veterans Day and Memorial Day. Flags will be going out tomorrow afternoon, starting at 1. Volunteers come up and assist, and one of my staff members leads the effort. Stay out for about a week, and we bring them in. But one thing, at the Veterans Cemetery, we don't have a lot of what I might say root clutter. If people want to have other things around a monument, then they need to go to another cemetery, not to the Veterans Cemetery. We have, floral arrangements of very very reduced amounts, but, you know, you can see when you come up, when the flags are there or otherwise, that it's pretty. There's a shot taken, I think, last week. You know, we did have some nice foliage, and it's really a pretty place. We're open daylight hours 7 days a week. The administration building vestibule is on a time lock, so, and same with the exterior bathroom, so 7 days a week, families, loved ones can come up and visit the graves or see the historic things. Those are the doors that are on a time lock, front of the administration building. So if you happen to not see, if for some fluke, if they're locked, the little white sticker on one of the doors is my cell phone, so feel free to give me a call and we'll get the doors unlocked when they're supposed to be open. That's the 20 points of the military history. At night, we can turn on the lights. We do occasionally throughout the year, but because the cemetery is only open daylight hours, it doesn't make a lot of sense to be turning on the lights and encouraging people to come in when we're not open. The storyboards, you can see there's an effort by next Wednesday. We're probably going to have some of the storyboards replaced and consolidated to include the Iraq and Afghanistan war. Thanks to the very generous Cemetery Association that has done, you know, through donations and whatever, are funding that effort to update those. You know, families visiting, the points at night, and then the memorial walkway, of which I show a few of the monuments there. The reflection fountain. I pulled the Navy one out. You know, Dave Kenny, the next speaker, retired Navy, and he's in the background there, but he was part of making that Navy monument happen back, he's a decade ago? No. Not quite, okay. But it was one of the early ones, one of the early monuments that got up there. You know, the Marines have another one, sub one for the Marines that's going up will be the Marine Raiders. There's going to be another side monument because a special part of the Marines. And then the Army Monument, Coast Guard Monument. That's the one that's currently you may be hearing about, Global War on Terror, that'll honor those from Afghanistan and Iraq that lost their lives. That's an ongoing effort. We hope to construct it next year. Groups visit. You can go out to our website if you know of somebody and you want to have them learn about the cemetery. You go out under videos. You can click on it. And Norm Sanborn from Rochester interviewed me, and that's what I have for you this morning. I went quick. I'd give Dave his time. Any questions at all, ma'am?
On your category, veterans, when is the Navy leaving?
The Navy waves, I probably ran out of room, but if you've got a question on that, you know, we've got the wave, awesome. I mean, that's the thing, and that's what I never want to leave out one of the branches. That based on World War II, there's a whole lot of categories that, you know, that's why we say put in your application with your paperwork. Let us determine your eligibility. Don't try to guess it yourself. But thanks for stepping forward and doing that. Anything else? If not, I'll turn it over to the next speaker. And if anybody wants a brochure, if you've already done it, and you maybe know a family member or a neighbor, they're available up at the cemetery, but I always try to bring them so people can have them ahead of time.
Thank you very much, Mike. Our next speaker is David Kenny, Commander Dave Kenny, retired. You are retired now, right? Because when I talked with you, you weren't quite there yet.
Yes, no, finally did.
Commander Kenny is currently the officer in charge of Voluntary Support Unit 0109, Navy Operations Support Command in Manchester, and officer in charge of the Navy Funeral Honors Team, providing coordination and training to Navy Honor Guard members and for the Joint Funeral Honor Guard. He's also established a training partnership program with the Bedford, New Boston, and Hooksett Fire Departments, providing drill and organizational training to their respective Honor Guard units. Commander Kenny is also a member of the State Veterans Advisory Affairs Committee. Yes, I keep wanting to call it council, but yes. And so he's going to be talking to you about that and the history of the committee itself.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, we're going to start with the technical stuff first. I'm going to dump Mike's and pull mine up here. Here we go. Well, good morning, everybody. It's good to see all these faces here, and my good friend Ed, who I was pleasantly surprised to bump into this morning. I'm here today to talk a little bit about our State Veterans Advisory Committee and a little bit about me outside of what Vivian had mentioned. I just retired this past month after 40 years in the United States Navy. I started out as an enlisted man, and then crossed over to what my chief calls the dark side and went to the officer corps. And, you know, I was listening to, I was talking to Vivian while we were having breakfast and asking her about her family, and of course she mentioned that her grandfather used to train both horses and officers, and I wonder which one was the easiest. My guess, it was the horses. But, so I recently retired, but I've been a part of this committee now since its reconstitution back in 2001, 2002 timeframe, when the committee was essentially reformed. It's been on the books for a little while, but the first iteration of the committee actually only met for a few years, and then it just kind of petered out, and they stopped meeting after that. But then Ken Leidner, who was the State House at the time and happened to be the last chairman of the original committee, said, you know, we need to get this thing going again. We need to get it back on track. And so basically, through concurrent legislation going through the House at the time and Ken's diligence, we were able to put it back together again in July of 2002, thankfully. So just to give you a brief history on the committee itself and how it was established, the advisory committee is structured under RSA 115, and basically it gives us the authority to meet as a committee, and our job essentially is to advise the legislature on all matters retaining about veterans and military issues, both here in the state and ostensibly also on a national scale. Our original advisory council, as I mentioned before, was loosely formed in '91, but they stopped meeting around '95, and so there was a gap of time there before they finally decided to push forward and do it again. So on July 17th of 2002, we reconvened at the LOB. Ken said, you know, we want to pull this thing together, and we had about 30 people at that time in the meeting, and we decided at that point, since we were now chartered under the state, that it was time to put together a more formal structure for the Veterans Advisory Committee. So we elected a chairman, a vice chairman who happened to be myself, and a secretary at that point, and then essentially that was our starting block. We were off. Dr. Delanus was our first chairman at the time, and then Ed Granger was voted as secretary, but unfortunately he had to leave the job shortly thereafter, and so at the current representative, Dick Heon at the time, he was a state rep up in Suncook. He took over as a secretary shortly thereafter. Back in '95, roughly, when the original council drifted off, one of the things that the state didn't have is we had at the time almost 40 different veterans organizations, and those were just the ones that we knew about. There were probably some that we didn't know about, but there were about 40 different organizations on the books at the time that had very little representation up at the House and in the political circles. So what I actually did at the time is I had formed what was the New Hampshire Military Coalition, which essentially was all of these different organizations pulled together. And we used to meet over at the Armed Forces Reserve Center in Londonderry once a month, and essentially the coalition was designed to do essentially the same thing that the Veterans Advisory Committee is doing today. But since the other committee had stopped meeting, we figured, well, this was a good way to fill the gap, so we did. So for the next 5 to 7 years, we were essentially doing the same type of job that the Veterans Advisory Committee was doing. After the Veterans Advisory Committee got reformed, it was decided that we would disband the coalition, and after the coalition was disbanded, we blended it together with the Advisory Committee. And our original voting associations were the American Legion, the DAV, VFW, some of the ones that you're all familiar with, as well as the Air Force Association, Vietnam Veterans Association, Military Order of the Purple Heart. Bucky Buckingham was one of our original representatives for that organization. And of course, the National Guard Association was part of it too. So we had 10 voting members at the table at that time. And like any other organization, we started out, it was slow. We had to pull things together. We recreated our mission statement at that time. We set up meetings that we would do once a month, usually the first Tuesday evening during the legislative season, which typically right now we're running between September, and then we run right through May or June, and then we take the summer off, and then we start up again in the following fall. And at that point, we also created a legislative liaison. I took up the job first, and the current individual that's doing that job is retired Air Force Colonel Ed Josephson. And that job essentially is to monitor all of the LSRs and RSAs that are being promoted at the LOB and at the State House on behalf of veterans issues and on behalf of military issues. So that individual's job is actually crucial to the committee because they're the ones that actually bring all that information to the committee, and they talk about the various bills that are being presented and promoted for that legislative session so that we as a committee can take them under advisement and then offer our advice in terms of either how to fix the bill, how to improve on it, or in some cases, if the bill is just way out in left field, we'll usually not support it, and we'll communicate that back to the legislators so that they know how we feel about it. This was our early wiring diagram when we first started, just to give you an idea on how small we were. As you can see, we had the legislative representation on the committee itself. We still do today. We try to get 2 senators and 2 representatives to come in and be part of the committee sessions each month. And then in addition to that, we had the 2 other committees we set up to really do public relations and education. We were brand new. Our first charter really was to let everybody know, the veterans organizations and things, that we actually existed and that we were doing something on the legislative level to help them out, as well as be a conduit for the veteran services organizations so that they can tell us what they want, or they can tell us what they need, or they can tell us what's missing. And that way we can promote it to the legislature so that we can get somebody to put in legislation to address those issues. And so that's the whole idea of the committee, really, is to be a conduit between the veterans community and the legislators in the state. Today, we have now 15 voting organizations. Basically, the way it works is when an organization attends several meetings, they petition the committee to be a voting member, in which case we take it to a vote, and if we vote the individual organization in, then they become part of the voting organization. We did have to adjust the RSA a little bit to expand the amount of voting associations up to 15 so that we could accommodate some of the newer groups that were coming in. This was a slow build over several years, but I can tell you today, every single meeting that we hold in Concord is full. And I mean, we fill the room. As a matter of fact, that picture right there that you see was from last night's meeting. That's just the voting members around the table. Over on the left, and you'll see in the next slide, there's all that section of the room on the left is also full of people that have come into the meeting from various associations, from the political offices, from the governor's office, there to not only listen, but present their ideas, their concerns. And it's really taken off to not just being a legislative issue or a legislative group, if you will, but being a veterans forum. We have a lot of guest speakers that come in and talk about what they do. And so it gives us an opportunity to listen to what people are doing for veterans around the state and to pass the word out and get the word out to the various groups and organizations so that everybody gets a chance to know what's going on. Our current chairman, Bobby Berneski, and our vice chair, Peter Burdett, who is also a former chairman for the group, they now have the helm. Today, our meetings have evolved into a forum. As I said, we have a typical attendance of 50 plus. Sometimes I've seen it more. We've had some meetings where it's been standing room only. It's been so packed in there. So it's really grown over the last 10 to 14 years, and it's good to see. It's good to see all these people and all these groups and associations concerned with veterans issues. We have a lot of staff members from the senators' offices, from congressional offices come in and present what they've been doing on behalf of veterans. We have advisors from all sorts of state departments and agencies, including the VA Medical Center, the Office of Veteran Services, et cetera. Some of these you're probably familiar with. the Veterans Home. Peggy is a regular attendee here. She's one of our advisors, as well as Barry Conway. He attends these meetings on a regular basis. You know, we still have, for those that are involved in these organizations for many, many years, they continue to come to these meetings and they continue to remain and stay engaged on making sure that veterans get the absolute best out of our state. And that's that's our job, that's our purpose, that's why we're there. So in putting this together, I had to kind of go through about 14 years worth of legislation, if you will, to kind of distill it down as to what the committee was involved in. So I hopefully have got it down to a compact list here. Some of the accomplishments that we've had here, first of all, revising RSA 115, we had to update it. It hadn't been changed in many, many years, and nowadays when veterans go and apply for benefits, they have to produce various documents, if you will, in order to essentially prove their status. Well, over the years, those documents, of course, have changed, and you know how the government is with paperwork. They just add a new number to it, and it all of a sudden becomes a brand-new form. So what we try to do is we're trying to keep up with that by changing the RSA so that all of the town clerks and those that are part of the veterans credit process can have the information so that they know what forms to look for when determining a veteran status. One of our big successes was increasing the veterans property tax status. It hadn't been touched in quite a while. And at the time when we were looking at this legislation, I believe the maximum amount of tax credit that a fully disabled veteran could get at the time was about $500. And we had increased that up to $2,000 for a disabled vet. And for a regular veteran applying for a tax credit for property taxes, at the time it was $50 or $100. Now it's up to a maximum of $500. The compromise, however, on that one was we had to allow the towns and cities to essentially appropriate the varying levels, if you will, of tax credit that they were going to give. That was the compromise with the Department of Revenue, because some of the towns said, you know, we're not sure that we can afford to give a lot of credits out there because it would really hit our tax base. So what we did was the legislation was written in such a way where each town had to vote on how much of a tax credit they were going to give. I will say gratefully that most of the towns opted to give the maximum credit to their veterans, and I think that's a credit to those towns and cities that did that. We've also worked on things like free access to parks and recreation areas, toll exemptions for veterans, state scholarships for children of members of the service who were killed in action or died on active duty, veterans license plate design changes. That's certainly taken a lot of our time in some cases. It's amazing how many people are interested in license plates. I had no idea there was such an interest in the license plates, but when we first started, I think there was only one license plate design, and now we've got, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 different ones now, including the National Guard, and we just recently passed the legislation to allow for active duty license plates. So those members here in state who are attached to active duty commands can go down and show their orders, and they can actually get an active duty license plate that identifies them as active duty military. Extended driver's license renewal options for those who were deployed from the reserves and the Guard. There was also a remote voting measure that had a little bit of trouble in the beginning, especially with the advent of these increased deployments over the last decade or so. We opted for improvements so that those that were deployed over in the Middle East could have an easier method of voting in local elections, so that their vote could count. Another one that was a big project for us, and one that we heartily supported, was the creation of the New Hampshire Medal of Honor. These are for families of members who die on active duty. That is an artist's rendition up there of the Medal of Honor up in the corner. When this was first designed and minted, we had a very large ceremony over at the Center in New Hampshire, and many of these were presented to the families of those members of the state Guard, reserves, and military who had died on active duty or who were killed in action. This is an ongoing program, and unfortunately, it's not one of those that, like anything else, you want to desire to give out, but it's our way of recognizing the sacrifice that the families have made on behalf of those that served and those that died in the line of duty. And that's one of the things that we wanted to do, just to show the families that we do appreciate what their loved ones did for the state of New Hampshire and for our nation. Adjustment of various veteran and military requirements for education, university access, educational benefits, both for the Guard and Reserve as well as for their families and for their children. Various legislation for bringing parity regards to pay and benefits to the National Guard members. And this is one of the things that, you know, in my opinion, is long overdue. You know, in recent days, from 1991 on, the amount of use of the Reserve and Guard services in active duty operations is unprecedented. As a matter of fact, it really becomes a force multiplier to the point where our total force could not be what it is today without the Guard and Reserve. And as a result, you have to really think of them as one and the same. But unfortunately, there are some laws out there that are still old, archaic, and haven't updated their language yet to represent the National Guard and Reserve in the true light in which they are, which is an active partner with their active duty counterparts. And as a result, we're working arduously to make sure that that parity continues with not only with the benefits, but with recognition as a veteran. They put the uniform on, they go overseas just like active duty people do, and therefore they should be treated, as far as I'm concerned, the same way. Gold Star Mothers Highway, we get into a lot of naming conventions here. Gold Star Mothers Highway, the Military Order Purple Heart Trail extension, we supported that. In recent years, we've done a lot of naming bridges after those that were killed in action in Operation Iraqi Freedom, Operation Enduring Freedom, so we're part of that. Improvements to the National Guard facilities, of course, to update them and keep them on par with their active duty counterparts. Sending Guard troops into an active operation, you want to make sure that they're as fully trained and capable as their active duty counterparts, and that means giving them the same equipment to work with and the same training options to work with. And also improvements to the New Hampshire Veterans Cemetery. We advocate for that in any opportunity, simply because, as many of you have been up there and have seen it, it is a gem. It is one of our most proudest accomplishments here in the state, and it was long overdue in getting it, and we're very, very proud of the grounds and the cemetery up there. And Mike and his staff do an absolutely superb job in keeping up those grounds, to the point where we have a lot of people coming in from out of state. They have no idea. They go in and they look at it and they go, wow, we had no idea this was here. We've even had people go in who had been from New Hampshire, they go in elsewhere, they came back and they said, wow, now that we know this is here, and they've changed their burial arrangements to come back up to New Hampshire and be buried there because of the fact that the cemetery is there and because of how beautiful it is. Who we serve? Well, we serve approximately 130,000 veterans here in the state of New Hampshire. We still have one of the highest percentile ratios of veterans to population in the country. We also serve the veterans' families. We advocate for them, we serve them, and we try to do our best to make sure that they get all the services and the benefits that they're entitled to, as well as support. With all the deployments and things that are going on now, the biggest thing right now for the families and for the individual service members themselves is support. We provide and disseminate information to the various veterans organizations. I said 35 plus, but I know it's more than that now. We advise our legislators on all matters related to military and veterans. And this is, again, both New Hampshire and nationally. We have staffers from Senator Ayotte's office, Senator Shaheen's office, and both congressional districts, and so they're part of the conversation. Every single meeting, they're part of the conversation. And so when we have concerns that may have a national impact, they take that back to their boss so that they can work on something on a national level. And also, we provide biannual reports on committee activities and what we do. to inform the governor, the governor's council, and all the legislators. So basically, we're obligated to report twice a year to let them know what we've been doing, what we've talked about, and essentially all the advisories we've given. And of course, last but not least, today we're here because of Veterans Day. And lastly, I just wanted to say that thank you for your service. Thank you, everybody in this room, for all of you who served, for making this country the greatest country in the world. And for those, for myself, who's traveled around a little bit in the Navy, I can honestly say that to this day, there is no country like the USA. Thank you for your attention. God bless.